Ever since I was a kid, I was in love with Kingdom Hearts. Mixing Disney and Final Fantasy, two of my most favorite things, was a dream game for me. And to top it all off, the game had an incredible gameplay style mixing the agile 3D platforming mechanics of Mario 64 with the deep JRPG mechanics of Final Fantasy. I've been working in the game industry for 8 years, and throughout that time I've worked on PC games, mobile games, and most recently VR games. But all this time I've always wanted to create a colorful and exciting game like Kingdom Hearts, and the thing that always kept me away from it was my lack of experience making third-person action games and being able to stick to a project long enough to see it to the end. But that has changed now that I've worked on a bunch of long-term game projects and recently worked on an Ape Escape remake project, which familiarized me more with making third-person action games. So now I've decided to finally make my dream game, Luminous Realms, a game heavily inspired by Kingdom Hearts alongside other games and stories I've experienced. To get things started, I create a project with a third-person template, as it provides me with the basic systems for a third-person action game. Then I prepared a playground scene with checker textures to help get a better feel of the size and distance of things. To have the right art style and vibe from the get-go, I got a character and wooden sword model to use for the time being until I start designing and creating the main character of Luminous Realms. With that already, it's time to start creating gameplay mechanics. At first, I thought the camera system would be pretty simple and straightforward, but I quickly realized that there is so much more complexity to the camera system in Kingdom Hearts. After closely watching and researching the camera in Kingdom Hearts, I started to understand why it works so well with all the crazy and fast-paced gameplay. I tried to match the FOV, angle, and distance of the camera by switching back and forth between Kingdom Hearts 2 and my game. To best match everything, I went to this special website called the Model Resource that contains all kinds of 3D models from different games and got the Stage 3D model to put it temporarily as a reference in the game. It's a really great resource to study and learn from the veteran artists and designers who worked on these big, great games. Just be cautious and make sure not to add any of these models and textures into your game and forget to remove them, and make sure to only use them for practicing and learning purposes. Finally, after I got everything matching exactly like Kingdom Hearts, I added the finishing touches with the camera smoothing in and out of movement and the zooming in and out system when looking up and down, and with a final cherry on the top with a reset system to put the camera back into its place. Next, I moved on to the movement system, and getting that right was extremely crucial. If the timing and speed are just a little bit off, things won't feel right when playing the game. While playing Kingdom Hearts 2, I measured the speed of Sora by measuring the time it would take him to walk a certain distance, and based on that I would be able to get the speed value for my character's running speed. I used the same technique to get the acceleration speed, jumping height, jumping speed, and gravity force. With that, I had the movement feeling more fluid and responsive, which is what always gave Kingdom Hearts over other games that extra agility. I then took a bit of a detour and worked on the shadow system of the character. I got a little excited to create the system after watching Mirza Beig's video on how to create shadows in Unity based on how it worked in Kingdom Hearts. Fun fact, Kingdom Hearts has no real-time lighting and shadows due to the hardware limitations of PlayStation 2. It used techniques like vertex coloring, shadow volumes, and material color switching to simulate the feeling of real-time lighting. Huge thanks to Mirza Beig and his great work on deconstructing all kinds of techniques used to make Kingdom Hearts on the PlayStation 2. Check out his channel to see more great deconstructing and game dev content. So for the shadow system, I basically have a top-down projection of the character rendered below to give the effect of real-time shadows. Now some of you may ask, why am I creating shadows using this old PlayStation 2 optimization technique that is no longer required with today's gaming hardware? Well, the reason for that is I just find it really interesting trying to learn and recreate all these optimization techniques, as I'm a huge fan of crazy tricks they used to pull off back in the early days of 3D consoles. Additionally, it can later be a great benefit for me to have Luminous Realms highly optimized to possibly be able to release it on lower end hardware such as Nintendo Switch and maybe even smartphones. One of the most essential mechanics in 3D action adventure games is the lock-on system that allows the player to lock on to enemies and objects in the game. For games like Dark Souls, the lock-on system can be pretty straightforward by just having the camera focus on the target while staying behind the player. Whereas in games like Kingdom Hearts and The Legend of Zelda, the lock-on system is a little bit more complex by having it focus at the midpoint between the player and the target. It also needs to make sure the player and the target doesn't go off the screen, and if they do get close to the screen border, the lock-on system needs to reposition the camera to make sure they're both on the screen. This system has been by far the most difficult and time consuming to make, taking me over 4 days to complete. And even after I was done with it, there were still a few more issues that needed to be polished. But to avoid spending too much time on one mechanic, I decided to leave it in its current working state and come back to it later to polish it up a little bit more. Next, I went back to the player character and added the hanging mechanic to allow the player to hang from ledges. The biggest challenge in this mechanic was setting up a ledge detection system that would be able to check if there's any ledge for the player to grab onto. Games like Assassin's Creed have a super advanced ledge detection system that would pre-calculate all the possible ledges that the player can grab onto before they even choose to do so. In my case, I just need a very simple detection system that just checks if a ledge exists at a certain distance and height from the player. This adds a lot to the gameplay and allows the player to try doing riskier jumps and be able to hang off platforms that were too high for them to reach just by jumping. Once the player is hanging, they can let go and fall down from the ledge or get over it with a cool air flip. Fun fact, in Kingdom Hearts 2, Sora uses only one hand to hang from a ledge so that the game doesn't need to do any complex calculations to check where each hand has to grab onto for uneven or smaller ledges. At the moment, I don't have a one-handed ledge grabbing animation to use, so I'm going to make do for now with my two-handed ledge grabbing animation. While I was creating all these mechanics, I got super excited to make the player HUD UI. It's something you see all the time in Kingdom Hearts and it's such an iconic thing. I created some textures for the HP and MP bar, but I didn't have any artwork for the character avatar. So I searched around for artists that draw in a similar art style as Tetsuya Nomura. So I got in touch with a few and ended up working with the artist Reverse Crown, who does great Kingdom Hearts inspired artworks. After a few back and forth, Reverse Crown made an awesome headshot artwork for my temporary character. Make sure to check out his Twitter and see all of his other great artworks. To make it all work in the game, I created a basic HP and MP system to use for the player and connected everything to work together. With that already, I went on to create the UI system with all the typical animations and effects seen in Kingdom Hearts. With the HP system implemented, I got excited to add a defeated sequence for when the player dies in the game, and so I got a defeated animation, added that to the game, programmed in a defeated sequence for when the HP goes to 0, and BAM! Now I have a nice little sequence for when the player is defeated. Going back to the movement system, I decided to add dodge rolling. It was pretty straightforward, setting up the animation and adding a system that moves the player forward at a specific speed and distance while the animation is playing. I always felt dodge rolling really added a lot of agility to action games. Finally, to wrap up the overall movement system for the player, I added in a glide mechanic as seen in most Kingdom Hearts games where the player is able to jump and then glide in the air across a long distance. Programming this was super easy, where I just had to reduce the gravity and increase the air control of the player while they fall slowly after performing a jump. Really feels great to fly around like that. A gliding system like this can allow for a more interesting stage design where the player needs to reach a certain place on the stage by gliding to it. With that all finished, I think I'm ready to start implementing a combat system for Luminous Realms. I'm really excited to start adding in different kind of attacks and enemies to battle, but that will have to wait for the next video. To make sure you don't miss when my next video comes out, subscribe to my channel and follow me on Twitter and my other socials to see my progress updates. You can also play Luminous Realms as I'm developing it by joining my Discord, where you can discuss and give feedback on the game with everybody as well. If you want to support me and help build Luminous Realms together, you can go to my Patreon, where you can get early sneak peeks of the game's progress, concept art, and a bunch of other rewards. You'll also get a shoutout in my videos and have your name in the game's credits. Speaking of shoutouts, I'd like to thank my gold patron, Legend64, for your continued support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Peace!